Welcome to my channel. My name is Bea, and today I've got my first true crime video for y'all, and I've been planning to do one of these for a long while now. I already kind of do my own writings on different true crime cases that interest me, just kind of compile all different research I can gather into just like one little document. And so I never really complete them. I got a bunch of like half-finished essays basically. That's usually like the end of it though. I never fully get out of my system, so I figured for once I would pick one particular story, really just focus on all the details and put it all into one collective video. So that's what I got for y'all here today, and I have a lot of different stuff planned for this channel, so stay tuned for all of that. But for today's video, we are talking about a lot of wild shit, all by the hands of Magdalena Solis. This case is not unknown by any means, but it's usually told more as like a spooky tale and really focuses on the vampire coded shit, which we'll get there. But what I find is a lot scarier is really diving deep into the twisted nature of it all and really immersing yourselves in the horrors of the human mind. And there's plenty of that in today's case of the high priestess of blood and her cult of vampires. The events of today's case come from the south end of the Sierra Madre Oriental, which is a mountain range that runs through the northeast section of Mexico. Along the mountains in this area on the eastern face is a series of caves, and then situated just below the caves are a few different, very small and very isolated villages. Yerba Buena in particular was a very disadvantaged community, given that the entire population was only around 50 to 70 people and only around like 20 families as a whole. And it's been said that the people of Yerba Buena were actually sent there by the Mexican state of Guanajuato to establish farmlands because there was quality soil over there that simply wasn't being used. It was more of a communal farming village than like an actual town. There was no running water, no electricity, no schools or stores. So it goes without saying that this was a very vulnerable group of people that were isolated, uneducated, and economically disadvantaged, which made them an entirely easy target when in 1962, two brothers showed up out of nowhere and completely disrupted the peace of Yerba Buena with twisted deception and sadistic control. Santos and Cayetano Hernandez had quite a bit of experience conning people through different various means all throughout Mexico. So basically they just travel all around Mexico committing like petty theft, and apparently they also had decent skills in magic that they would use to kind of trick people and take advantage of them. And I'm not sure exactly like what these tricks were, but it's just been said that that was kind of how they were able to manipulate people. So one day, these brothers show up to the small village of Yerba Buena and proclaim themselves as prophets of the ancient Incan gods. And basically, immediately, they start demanding monetary tributes in exchange for the promise of unburying treasure that was rumored to be in the nearby mountains. So basically it was like a myth around these villages that there was gold buried in the mountains that was saying they're like basically in these Sierra Madre. Whether or not it was a commonly known myth, this was the stories that the brothers were leading on and planning to capitalize off of. And given the lack of education of the people of Yerba Buena, they unfortunately fell for Santos and Cayetano's bullshit. And they did in fact believe this myth the brothers had anticipated, whether or not it was something that was formerly like going around town or something that the brothers introduced to them. Either way, they bought it. But Santos and Caetano did not do their research to back up this little story, because if you weren't already aware, the Incan civilization is like way down south in Peru, not in central Mexico where this takes place. Unfortunately, this discrepancy went unnoticed by the village, or at least nobody acknowledged the inconsistency, because Santos and Caetano also told them that if they didn't obey, then they would be punished as heretics. That was kind of part of the deal. Like I said before, Santos and Caetano first explained to the village that the gods require money and valuable possessions in order to unbury this treasure. And so they immediately start giving Santos and Caetano basically everything they have, as well as put them up in the nicest crib in town, which was like a little hut outside of the caves, like at the base of these caves that were near the mountains or near the village. From this point forward, the brothers were to be treated like kings, or well, like prophets of ancient Incan gods. Obviously, these people only had so much to offer, which Santos and Caetano were not willing to settle for, because this was supposed to be their most lucrative scheme yet. Like, they came into this being like, okay, done with our petty crimes, like this is it, this is our break, and we're gonna make bank. So they weren't about to just drop it all once they like got everything they could get, which kind of probably thinking like, okay, so what else did they do? Like, what did they try to get to these people? But you can only take so much from people that have nothing left to hand over. So the brothers soon decide that they ought to find other means of benefiting from these people that are so willing, or rather scared into submission. Santos and Caetano began handpicking the prettiest girls of Yerba Buena and explaining to their parents that the gods had commanded that the brothers sexually educate these girls, and basically that they would teach them various sexual behaviors, and then have them practice such lessons on the brothers. And then once the gods had decided that these girls were sufficiently sexually educated, they would be sold off into nearby towns into sex slavery. This way, the brothers would be able to still get monetary gain out of this whole situation. And by the way, most of these girls were around 14 to 16 years old. So these are very young girls, but it was not exclusive to them with the like sexual abuse, because also men and women were also being exploited as Santos and Caetano's personal sex slaves. Now, remember those caves that I mentioned in the beginning of the video? Well, it was in one of these caves that Santos and Caetano would hold their ceremonies. And so now I'm gonna just kind of go over all the twisted shit that would go on in these bizarre rituals, okay? The brothers would chant from an altar while burning incense and participating in a little puff puff pass session, alright, and also they'd also pass around peyote tea. I don't think it's a kind of point in the story that a lot of people just skip over. They like talk about all the crazy shit they did, and they're like, oh, by the way, they were high off of peyote and marijuana, like all the time, but it's cool. Even if all you're doing is smoking a little green, sipping on some cactus, I really do think that incorporating these substances is a very crucial influence to these type of cases, these like cold cases and such. Not because you're like high out of your mind, but because you're more connected with each other spiritually, and therefore are more likely to go along with the shit that goes on in this case, or just goes on in the room, really, especially when in an actually spiritual context. Switched on my candle, y'all. Reset on my camera. Got completely different vibes going on, so hopefully I didn't change too much. All right, so we established the setting of the rituals, right? So what did they really like doing there? Well, first they would slit the throats of goats. And at first I was like, where they would get a bunch of goats. And then I remember it was like a farming village. They probably got a bunch of like farm animals, which I'm pretty sure they also were doing sacrifices with like all of the animals, not just goats. So yeah, I'm sure that was just part of the, you know, give us everything you got. Like, we need to also take your source of like your food and what you got going on here, because the whole thing was about farming that they had going on in town. And that just left me thinking, like, what happened after all of this? You know what I mean? Like reestablishing the town. I just wonder how all that went down, because this town was all based on farming, and so they kind of seemingly wiped out all the animals. Because I'm like, they did this so often. I don't know how many they had to start with and end with, and this was how they made their money. So I'm kind of like interested in how they rebuilt the town afterwards, but I couldn't find the information on it now. I'll just tell you that now, that I couldn't find any of that, but it's still just like worth, you know, it's a thought to have. And then after the animal sacrifice, that's when the brothers would tell everybody in the village to participate in an orgy, including the animals and the children. So there's like bestiality and pedophilia and incest going on. Just nobody went unharmed by the Hernandez brothers. And also at the same time, they were still abusing these girls, like outside of the ceremonies, just as like a daily thing going on at this point. But Santos and Cayetano did not go completely unchecked, because after a while people started speaking up like, where's our shit? Basically, people just started speaking up about this promised treasure that never showed up, because after all, this pledge is how the compliance culminated to such deprived behavior in the first place. And at this point, they've given up everything, including their daughters. So where is it? Where is this treasure, and why do the gods have such disgusting requests to hand it over? They've done everything that they've been asked, so when is it enough? Best be handed over. Like, in such a tiny community, word travels fast, and soon enough, word got back to the brothers about the dwindling faith and doubts floating around the community. This is when the brothers decide they really need to escalate their manipulation tactics. They gotta do something real big to wrap the people of Yerba Buena right back around their cold-blooded, crusty little fingers, okay? So Santos and Cayetano traveled to Monterrey, Mexico, which I'm pretty sure is like the closest city, if not major city, to these villages out in the mountains, okay? So they travel over here to meet up with one of their trafficking associates named Elazar Solis. And Elazar Solis was a pimp that they met when selling the village girls into sex slavery. And I'm pretty sure they actually sold them like into the brothel that Elazar ran. I could be wrong on that, but just kind of makes sense to me, because they went to the same guy that they met doing it, and they assumed that Elazar would kind of have access to a lot of women since he was in this business. Santos and Cayetano proposed their plan to Elazar, which is that they want a woman to bring back to Yerba Buena that would pretend to be an ancient Aztec goddess to essentially compensate for their unfulfilled promise of unburying non-existent treasure in the mountains. Honestly, I don't understand their logic here on how they figured that bringing home a goddess would fix everything, but it did. So I guess they had the dynamic down by now. I just still think it's a wild choice when they could have just moved on to the next town. Thankfully they didn't, but still. Anyways, they explain this plan to Elazar, and what do you know? Elazar knows the perfect girl boss for this role, okay? One of his sex workers and very own sister, Magdalena Solis. Magdalena actually grew up in sex work and was forced into it at the age of just 12 years old. Not much at all is known about Magdalena's background, besides the fact that she was around 18 years old during the events of this case. So I could only imagine the type of childhood she had and what we don't know about. Magdalena had a side hustle of supernatural cons. She would basically sell herself off as a curandera, as like she could do all sorts of holistic healing, as well as being a medium, a fortune teller, and that she could speak to the dead. Just checking off all the boxes, right? And it's been said that Magdalena's services were specifically sought out to speak to dead witches. So do with that information as you will. With this niche experience up her sleeve, the brothers were quite confident in her abilities to fulfill the role as an ancient goddess. And I'm sure it didn't sound like too bad of a gig either, like having people wait on you hand and foot. Sign me up. It was decided that Magdalena would play the role of none other than the ancient Aztec goddess of the earth, Quadlique. I was originally planning on doing a video all about the famous Quadlique statue as well as the goddess herself, and that's when I came across this cult story involving Quadlique and just got completely hooked on the depravity of this story. I would actually fucking love to still do a deeper dive on Miss Necklace of Hearts and Hands, so if you would like a video on that, let me know in the comments. I think that she has a couple traits that, in my opinion, are quite relevant to this story and the role that Magdalena goes on to play. Kind of just describe a few things about Quadlique and ask you to kind of keep in mind those characteristics when I explain the rest of the story and everything that Magdalena goes on to do. It just makes it a little more entertaining and highlights the irony of doing diabolical shit in the name of such a respectable deity. Somebody lock her up for impersonation because this shit is insane. The statue of Quadlique is a greatly accurate display of the fierceness of the Aztec Empire, and I'm not gonna lie, her whole getup is fucking metal as hell. Her actual appearance isn't relevant to the story because I'm pretty sure that the Hernandez brothers and Elazar just kind of got Magdalena like an Indian girl costume and called it good. That is such a lie. That is so not true. Her appearance is in fact very relevant. I just still don't think that they dressed up Magdalena to look anything like Quadlique, but that's besides the fact because I literally acknowledged that Quadlique has a necklace of hearts and hands and then completely failed to talk about how that's supposed to indicate Quadlique's need for human sacrifice, apparently. So, bitch, as relevant as they come. I don't know how I didn't say that before, but anyways, keep that in mind. Quadlique is a venerated idol of fertility. She's a display of Mother Earth as a collective, including childbirth, life, fertility, and death. Quadlique quite literally translates to skirt of serpents, which is a distinguishing element to her iconography. The serpent's ability to shed and regenerate skin connects her to reincarnation and fertility. I'm literally so annoyed with how badly I'm explaining all of this, given that it was the entire reason I made the video in the first place. But any fucking ways, connecting those last 2 points, all right? Quadlique is said to be basically a guide through reincarnation and rebirth. I've also read that snakes coming from body parts in these like Aztec artworks can also depict squirting blood, but I'm not really sure about that. I read nowhere any explanation as to why the brothers chose Quadlique in particular as their deceptive deity. Quadlique is essentially the mother of the Aztec goddesses, so there's that, you know, go big or go home. But I truly do not think that Santos and Cayetano really thought that far, considering that when introducing themselves to the village, they claim to be Incan gods, not Aztec. So, like, I don't think they really cared too much to get their facts straight on the shit, or they just didn't fucking know. She represents fertility, so a lot of her descriptions explain that she has saggy breasts to indicate that she's given birth many times. Like, it's literally part of her, like, her whole look. It's likely that the brothers just chose the only goddess that they knew, but there were a few details about Magdalena's tactics when basically cosplaying as Quatlique that were very interesting to me nonetheless. So I totally could be reading too much into the details, but I noticed some weird shit in this case in correlation to not only Quatlique, but other traditional Aztec beliefs that these four twisted into a fucking scam. Now that they've got the perfect girl for the role, Santos and Cayetano return to Yerba Buena with both Eleazar and Magdalena. Eleazar was not initially part of the plan. The brothers just needed a woman that would be willing to come back with them to play dress up and recite a few lines. But nonetheless, Eleazar ended up participating in the scheme as high priest. I think Eleazar came for no reason other than to keep an eye on Magdalena and make sure that she was not benefiting from this alone. Like, if Lil Sis is making that coin, best believe I'm gonna chaperone. And coming with, he's able to keep tabs on Magdalena and make sure she's not like making good money and then leaving him. But that is, of course, anticipating that Magdalena is going to obey and go along with these dudes' stupid ideas. Okay, that was only the most frustrating thing ever. Fucking cut me off to say I was out of storage. Bitch. I've been out of storage, the fuck? So I just had to delete like everything off of my phone, so that's lovely. And why is it doing that? Why is this happening? It's important to know that at this point in the story, Santos and Cayetano are still to be the ones calling all the shots. They just needed Magdalena to keep everybody under control so that they could milk this lie as much as possible. For Magdalena's entrance to Yerba Buena, they dressed her up all in like a feather headset and necklace of bones, trying to like fit the whole ancient Aztec goddess look. On the night of the big reveal, all of the villagers are summoned to the cave for one of their routine rituals. As usual, Santos and Cayetano are chanting and preparing this peyote and marijuana. But while enacting the ritual, a third man appears and he introduces himself as the high priest of the ancient Aztec goddess Quatlique. Then suddenly, everybody inside the cave hears this loud ass noise that brings their attention to a cloud of smoke that's coming from the back of the cave. And out from the smoke appears none other than the ancient Aztec goddess Quatlique. And everybody's just standing there in absolute disbelief, like, be so fucking for real right now. And in case you're curious about this cloud of smoke, it was just flash powder that was ignited at just the right time, and don't ask me to like explain it any more than that because I don't fucking know. Seeing this incredible deity before them was confirmation to the villagers that the brothers were telling the truth and that the gods were coming to reward them for obeying since the beginning and sacrificing so much for this beautiful goddess standing right before them. Upon seeing her, they all just dropped to their knees and began praying to her. And from this point forward, Magdalena was to be waited on hands and foot, and the villagers just obeyed every damn word, unfortunately. This power did not take long to get to Magdalena's head, and it only manifested into progressively twisted shit. The way she was being worshipped, it's been alleged that Magdalena did eventually start genuinely believing that she was this higher power and just completely stopped listening to all three of the men. She became legitimately convinced that she was this all-ruling deity and was not a merciful one at that. Magdalena soon abandoned any fear she had towards the men because she was quite confident that if it came down to it, she had an entire village at her beckoning call. She was powerful enough to turn this entire village against not only the men that she came with, but turn them against their own loved ones that most of them probably known their entire lives. This is the point in the case where all of the vampiric shit comes into play. All of the fucked up shit that goes on in the torture cave is, as far as we know, mostly all done by the hands of Magdalena. So what did homegirl even do that was so bad? Well, for starters, she continued the regular ceremonies that Santos and Cayetano were conducting. So that meant she immediately hopped on the and peyote, burning the incense, saying their chants, doing their little animal sacrifice and shit. They're still doing these crazy orgies, and Magdalena starts collecting her own little group of her own personal sex slaves. She quickly began incorporating progressively darker material into her version of the rituals. So this peyote tea we've been talking about, Magdalena looks at it and is like, oh, cute, and just totally like goes to the next level. She mixes it with blood, and genuine question, okay, I just really want to know if they like made peyote tea and then mixed it with blood, or if they literally like steeped the peyote in fresh hot blood and like literally infused the blood with peyote. Sorry if that's dark, but I know with how far you've gotten in the video, we already think alike, so don't even. She also told them that drinking this blood would give them magical powers and immortality. And you'll come to notice that Magdalena, our girl, seems to have like a sort of like a blood kink or something, because she kind of just takes everything that the brothers were doing, the Hernandez brothers were doing, and then just kind of like adds blood to the mix. Literally, like as you just saw, like peyote tea, and then she's like, oh yeah, but what if we did that with like blood though? Everybody's so creative, like. So like, whose blood? And the answer to that, baby girl, Magdalena Solis. Okay, Magdalena Solis would slit her wrists and let that shit drain into a ceremonial chalice. I like to picture it was the Mexican chalice by Antonio Fasada. It's just pretty and fitting. And I hate to be the one to say this, but like getting a room, or mind you, a cave full of people high off of your blood, it's just objectively cool. Like that would be a nice visual in like a Zealand art or music video. Like make a Run Part 2 with the High Priestess of Blood. I think yes. Magdalena continued with these ceremonies for an entire 6 weeks before anybody started speaking up. As soon as word got back to Magdalena about this questioning of her authority, she ordered the rest of the village to lynch these two individuals that were allegedly the culprits of this traveling doubt within the community. With Magdalena's growing ego, these punishments that she would inflict on her perceived heretics would also just grow in extremity. What started with the villagers turning on their own families turned into Magdalena picking people, presumably at random, to sacrifice to the gods, and in hand taking their lives in harrowing ways. The lynching suddenly evolved into just straight up torture. They would beat these people basically to death for burning and stabbing them, and then once they were dead, the bodies would typically be dismembered. And keep in mind that all of these victims have immediate family that are participating in their public execution of their completely innocent loved ones. All of the remaining villagers are completely aware and in acceptance that if one of their family members are chosen for this human sacrifice, they have to turn on them and without question, or else they themselves might be the next sacrifice up on the altar. Magdalena then starts ripping the hearts out of these victims' bodies. The exact number of victims is unknown, but it is believed to be around 10 to 15 people that Magdalena sacrificed in this way. Once Magdalena started incorporating human sacrifices into the rituals, she moved on from cutting herself and switched to using the victim's blood. What they would do is drain the blood from these bodies into the same chalice from before, and then mix that with chicken blood. I'm very interested in her reasoning behind this particular formula, especially the chicken blood edition. Maybe it was just that they simply had a lot of chickens in town. It was a farming village after all, or perhaps it was less messy than lifting a cow onto the altar. Regardless, this mixture would be passed around the cave in preparation for the orgies that were still taking place. that peyote probably was perceived as a magic inducing to the villagers, because remember, the people of Yerba Buena lacked education in basically any subject besides farming, and I highly doubt that the people of Yerba Buena were abusing their agricultural skills to trip off peyote. They probably weren't familiar with the hallucinogenic properties of using this cactus in such a capacity, if you're following along with me here. They probably were thinking that it was Coatlique's blood that was in fact giving them these euphoric feelings. I am no scientist, okay, and I've also never done any psychedelics myself. And according to missscience.org, okay, psychedelics are serotonin 2A receptor agonists that can lead to profound changes in perception, cognition, and mood. So imagine the damage being done from regular disruption from this, or of this stability as a normally functioning human. Like, can't be good. And that's just the thing. These people didn't like just drink some infused tea once or twice and then start doing all this shit. They've been hallucinating for almost this entire 6 weeks. Like, no wonder shit escalated to the point that it did. I don't have any personal experience with peyote, so everything that I know about it, its effects, is based on what I read on the internet, okay? First thing I was looking for is how long a peyote high typically lasts. And the answers I got basically varied on like, you know, how it's taken and how much. But the like average sort of, the estimate that I kind of compiled was like 8 to 15 hours is a typical like peyote high. And these people, this cult was partaking in this peyote at least every 2 days. So I'll let you do the math on that one. Point is, these people were high as shit for like a while, and I'm pretty sure that does shit to your brain. And I could be wrong, but I just feel like sufficiently tripping on hallucinogenics on a nearly daily basis would make you susceptible to believing outlandish stories that lead you to murdering the only people you've ever known. Just kind of makes sense to me. And we're not just talking about developed adult brains here. I'm pretty fucking sure that the minors were also participating in all of this. And it's one thing when your mind can come up with its own organic visions, and then another when you're being spoon-fed like what to think and what's real, and when that supposedly reality is just some wild ass shit. And then add on the fact that the people of Yerba Buena, I don't want to say they didn't know better, because I feel like that insinuates that these people are like dumb and didn't know right from wrong. And I definitely don't think of these underprivileged people as stupid by any means, but at the end of the day, these people did not know better. Like, they didn't know that the Incan Empire was not from Mexico, and they also didn't seem to realize when the brothers introduced the goddess from an entirely different culture than before. You know what a lot of hallucinogenic stories have in common, whether it's a good or a bad trip? So many people report an interaction with some sort of higher power. This is something that I've always just kind of heard in my life, but this is my first time actually looking into the scientific reasoning behind it all, so bear with me because I'm about to get all boring and technical again. The NIH did a subjective survey on God encounter experiences, comparisons amongst naturally occurring experiences and those accompanied by the classic psychedelics. What they found was that God encounter and mystical experiences have been described after ingestion of classical psychedelic drugs such as psilocybin, LSD, DMT, and mescaline, all of whose actions are mediated at the serotonin 2A receptor. Most participants reported vivid memories of the encounter experience, which frequently involved communication with something having the attributes of being conscious, benevolent, intelligent, sacred, eternal, and all-knowing. Now just think about it for a second. If you are being presented by somebody who's straight up telling you, I am this sacred, eternal, all-knowing goddess, while under this type of influence so often, and then everybody else around you is going along with it, it kind of just eventually becomes accepted. And I do think that that's why the violence escalated to collective involvement. Magdalena didn't step out of the smoke and immediately start ordering everybody to turn it against the men she came with and start ripping the hearts out of each other's chests. Like, no. That's why I think it's important to discuss this rather influential part of the case, because the brutality was notably gradual, rather very quickly escalated, but it was still a process regardless. I really do think it was the drugs and power that made Magdalena do the things she did, in combination with her abusive upbringing. The more Magdalena was worshipped by the village, and the more loyalty and willingness they displayed to her, the more she would ask of them, and the more sadistic her manipulation would get. At first, they were giving up their loved ones, and then 6 weeks later, they were all killing each other as this like group project. Another point I wanted to make was that I am sure that this peyote that Magdalena was also taking probably had a big role, a big contribution to her basically hallucinations that she was quadlige, if that's in fact true, because there is also the possibility that that was kind of just her excuse for this power trip. The whole human sacrifice part of the story is what made me really want to do my own video on this case. Not because of how twisted and disturbing this case is, as is plenty emphasized by other retellings of this story, but because of how I believe Magdalena is given way too much credit. Yes, I am calling Miss Human Sacrifice unoriginal. Okay, what about it? Are you gonna defend her? Like, I just don't agree with how this case is portrayed more as a horror film storyline than as an actual true crime case that involves for real fucked up people that inflicted such brutality on such innocent and naive beings. And I can't even say innocent and naive people, because it's all like anything in the village that had legs was fucking being tortured by these people. I didn't know where to put this in the video, okay? But if you look up like any version of the title you want of this case into like the YouTube search bar, the Google search bar, whatever, like look up whatever you want to see what pulls up. I kid you not, like I promise you, most of what you see, pictures of Dagmar Overby. And that's not like, huh? Like we're not different women, different crimes. All right, let me get back on track. Human sacrifices to the gods in several similar capacities was such a regular practice in not only Aztec culture, but just a general Mesoamerican tradition. What really had me hung up about Magdalena was the fact that everything she does in terms of human sacrifice is all just copy and paste like actual Aztec human sacrifice, just without the respectable lore behind the actual Aztec tradition. Like she did everything that the Aztecs did for the gods just for no reason. Like, of course we know now that the world wasn't gonna stop spinning if blood wasn't shed in this way, which the Aztecs unfortunately did believe would happen if the gods weren't satisfied with this sacrifice. But Magdalena did not have a god to be sacrificing these people to, because she herself was supposed to be the mother of all Aztec goddesses, Coatlicue. Like, unless she was sacrificing them to like the gods of the Sierra Madre, then I don't know what this girl was up to. Like, stop ripping the hearts out of these people. That's just mean. In these drug-induced orgies, Magdalena would involve the animals of the village as well as the other children, just like Santos and Cayetano did. So this will naturally lead to, you know, like I said before, bestiality, pedophilia, incest, and she would just kind of sit back and watch this all, just soak it all in. And so it's for that reason, it's quite clear that Magdalena did get some form of sexual gratification from all of this, which is in the worst possible way very fucking fascinating that a female serial killer was sexually motivated, seemingly. If you aren't already aware, okay, the possibility of a serial killer being female is already so unlikely, and then add on the possibility of them like having any sexual intention, that's just so like that's so like unheard of. Female serial killers are typically in a position of care, like hospitality, unless it's financially motivated, and even then it's sometimes like a combination of the two, like taking care of some old woman on her last days while simultaneously taking care of her pockets, like, if you get what I'm saying. For it to be so far on the violent spectrum is just wild. Like, I shouldn't say the violent, but the like sexually violent spectrum, and to like be making all these people do all sorts of shit. I was going to say that I believe the statistic is over 90% of serial killers are male, and then I was like, okay, maybe I'm being dramatic. Let me check myself real quick. I looked it up, and bitch, exactly. I pay attention to this shit, because according to the University of Michigan, okay, did I say of a Michigan? I don't know. University of Michigan, okay. Let me fucking see. As of March 4th, 2023, only 8.6% of known serial killers are female. Okay, so that's the only information I was even looking for. Like, I literally just looked up like how many serial killers are female or whatever, and the full result actually said, okay, let me pull it up again. Okay. So this theory is especially pertinent in cases where sexual desire appears to have been a prime motive. So I was like, okay, tell me about this theory. Like, what? And it said it said, to anyone who has ever studied crime or even just listened to every episode of a true crime podcast, it is no surprise that most serial killers are male. A leading theory for this phenomenon is that men are simply more violent than women. In the world, men are arrested at almost 4 times the rate as women for violent crimes. Another theory regarding why there are more male serial killers rests on the recurring finding in clinical psychology that men are more likely to have paraphernalias than women. All of this to make the point that this is supposed to be a dude thing, like, which makes me think, and I probably would have come to this conclusion anyway, is that this was all about power to Magdalena. Like, and it makes sense, like, if her whole life has only been people taking over her sexually, it's like, it makes sense that that would be her idea of power, you know what I mean, of utmost, like, taking the life out of someone, you know what I mean, the most efficient way to do so. Whether or not Magdalena was sexually aroused by the violence, I do believe that power was her true motivator, and that she would not have done any of this shit if she wasn't involved with the men, but that's just my opinion. All right, I'm in a new chair, y'all. My man's coming home and I was in his gaming chair, and it's fun because it like rolls around and shit. And this one's just... But anyways, I'm now going to just go over the official accounts of how this little cult was discovered, and then afterwards is when I'm going to sort of pick it apart, because girl, I got a lot of fucking questions, okay? I don't... So the story goes, one day in May of 1963, a 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Guerrero was just wandering around the area when he saw flickering lights coming from a cave in the distance and decided to go check it out. The closer he got, the louder he heard these bizarre noises that he couldn't really tell if they were that of a human or something else entirely. He decides to investigate this cave that he can now see has people in it, and he hides behind a rock that's situated near the opening of the cave. Behind this rock, he's trying to simply make out what he's even witnessing until his eyes settle on a young woman standing before a group of people, and she's holding what seems to be a human heart. He also sees a bunch of people on the ground up to all kinds of freaky shit, and the ones standing are passing around a cup presumably filled with blood. He knew that this was blood that the people were drinking once he realized that on this altar that Magdalena was standing at was a dismembered human body. And in this moment, he also realizes that those strange noises he heard from before was the sounds of this person's brutal murder. Once he kind of puts all this information together in his mind, he's obviously panicking and decides he's got to book it. So he turns around and does not look back for an entire 10 miles to the nearest police station. And when he gets to this police station, he immediately begins to frantically explain what he had just encountered in the mountains. And right off the bat, the police officers are just not believing anything out of Sebastian's mouth. This was except for one officer by the name of Luis Martinez that actually did end up driving Sebastian back to the cave to go check all of this out. And then of course, violence ensues. And I'ma just spoil it now. The next time the two were seen was unalive. Okay, so the first thing I want to get out of the way is I'm not completely sure on the series of events from when Sebastian comes across the cave to when Officer Martinez actually comes and visits the scene. That's why I laid it out as Sebastian arrives at the police station and then eventually Luis comes back with him to check it out. This is because I've heard conflicting stories, with the difference being that in one account, Sebastian would not leave the station until somebody came back with him to check the shit out. Respectable. And then in another version, Sebastian basically gives up on explaining himself to the police, and then it's not until the next day that he just can't get this shit off of his mind, so he goes back to the police station and basically tells them like, yo, you've got to come with me, at least like check it out. And then that's when Luis Martinez goes back with Sebastian. But what I personally believe happened was that in not believing Sebastian's story, Luis offers to drive him home, and then it's on the way back to his village that Sebastian's like one-on-one, you know, person to person, trying to convince him, yeah, like, yo, let's at least drive past, see what's up, and then I'll drop this whole thing and go home. I do actually think it would make a lot of sense for the police to want to keep this little detail secret, because if that series of events is true, then Officer Luis Martinez would not be authorized to do this little search. Am I wrong? Like, drop off the kid and come back to work? This would also explain why Luis was out there with no backup. Because hear me out, I don't know how they did shit in Mexico in the 60s, because this might surprise you, but I was not there. But this still had me real caught up, because what do you mean somebody came into the station talking about there's some dude bleeding out in a cave and then you sent just one guy? I get it was the 60s, but did they not have radios or a carrier pigeon? Was there not like a buddy system implemented for the police? Even if they didn't necessarily believe the kid's story, I would imagine that whatever the fuck he said when frantically running into the police station had to be at least a little bit concerning. At the very least, interesting enough to think later, like, wonder what happened to that kid that cried vampires and the officer we sent to go with him and check that out. Like, must be out sick. Like, what? Forget the kid, it's the fucking police incompetent that fucking always throws me for a loop, because they didn't even keep checks on their, like, they didn't even keep tabs on their own homie. Also, maybe these rituals were being held daily at this point, but I think it was more like every other day. And if the duo really didn't pull up until the next day, then I don't know how much I would bet on the chances that they were basically holding the same exact rituals that Sebastian walked in on. That's why I really do think that the officers just did not believe Sebastian at all, and it wasn't until Luis Martinez was driving him back that he was either convinced of the story or like some sort of concern, or that he just did it to shut the kid up. I don't think that this detail is very important, but it's still something to be questioned, and that's just what Sebastian was even doing out in the mountains at sundown. I did read that he was specifically exploring the caves in search of the same treasure that Santos and Cayetano were capitalizing off of. I lean towards the idea that he really was just walking around the desert for funsies, because when I was 14, I would also just go on abrupt evening adventures in the woods. So it makes sense, but that's also exactly why you shouldn't let your kids do that, because this dude ended up mutilated in a cave of vampires. So I don't know, maybe tell your kids to just stay in the neighborhood. Whether Sebastian genuinely believed this myth or it was just an excuse to go on an adventure, I still want to talk about it more in depth because I fell down a rabbit hole about this alleged treasure in the Sierra Madre Mountains, which turns out is almost word for word the title of a 1927 novel by a very mysterious author by the name of Bruno Travin or B. Travin. The book in question is titled The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and was later adapted into a Western adventure film by the same title in 1948, about 14 years before the events of this case. So if the story and the myth have common origin, then that would put the release of this book right around the same time that Sebastian was born. So I think it's totally plausible that this was a myth that Sebastian grew up hearing about the neighboring mountains. And I guess the movie was pretty good too, because in 1990 the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So at first I just did like a literal sentence long summary of the story, okay? And I don't even lie, it doesn't sound that interesting to me. It just sounded like three dudes like looking for gold in the mountains or whatever. But then I was like, okay, if it's got awards and shit, it seems popular, I should at least do my due diligence of like looking a little bit more into it. So I looked up just like the trailer or whatever, and it was cute or whatever. So I thought that I would just at least do the credit of just showing like some of that. So here's like a minute or so of the trailer to the Sierra Madre, the treasure of the Sierra Madre. Go.
Up into the forbidding majesty of the great Madre Range go men, their pasts buried in silent secrecy, their futures hidden in the mystery of adventure. Men drawn together in their search for gold. Dog, soldier of fortune. Howard, the old-timer. Curtin, the youngster. And Cody, the intruder. These are the men who tried to tap the treasure of the Sierra Madre. Men with an oath on their lips and muscles in their arms, but men with greed in their hearts. Ready to break their backs, to sell their very souls for gold, fighting shoulder to shoulder against the forces of nature, only to find their greatest enemy is human nature.
Shut your trap! Shut up or I'll smash your head flat! Go ahead, throw it! Without me, you two would die here more miserable than rats.
Leave him alone. Can't you see the old man's nuts?
You're so dumb you don't even see the riches you're treading on with your own feet.
Back to Mr. Travin, his real name, date of birth, and basically any other like basic identifiable information about him is completely unknown. All we really know about him was that he was born in Germany and that at some point he lived for some years in Mexico somewhere, which is actually all I wanted to know, because some sources were saying that this whole treasure in the mountain story was an actual myth believed by the people in this area of Mexico. But then when I was doing my own research on this alleged myth, I just couldn't find anything besides this damn book. So I thought maybe this was an actual myth believed amongst a small group of people in Mexico, like in this area, and perhaps the author of this book was part of this population, or you know, he just came up with the story when he lived around these people and it spread around as a rumor. So I could be wrong about both of those things, but it was just a interesting speculation I came up with. But either way, besides this limited paper trail, very limited, I really couldn't find any other information about the author or about this myth. Sebastian was running to town with the obvious intention to alert people of what was happening in the mountains and to get help. If he felt so scared and so unsafe that he had the adrenaline to run like that, I would imagine that any child in that type of situation would run to the nearest safety, most likely their home. I'm not sure how far away his village was from Yerba Buena, but it surely was not 10 miles. I do wonder how this young boy knew how to get from where he was all the way to this police station that was nearly 15 miles away. Maybe I'm overestimating the difficulty of navigating this area, like it could have just been a lot of road. But I still don't buy it because first off, this was an isolated mountainous area, and then second off, no matter how aware of his surroundings Sebastian was, he was still in a state of fear. Even if this boy knew every inch within a 50-mile radius, I just feel like he wouldn't be instinctively running away like that and then also be thinking clearly about direction. If you've ever instinctively ran away from a dangerous situation, you know that it's not about the destination, it's about getting the fuck out of there. Also, Sebastian thought he saw vampires, and I don't think he's gonna be running out in the open so that these vampires could like catch up to him and get him. No, I'm way too hung up on this. I just really want to know why he wouldn't just go back the way he came from. If you combine those last theories, there is a possibility that he did think he was going home, and in a panic he just didn't realize he was going the wrong way until it was too late, and then he just kept running until he got to the nearest town, which thankfully was a town that had a police station. Speaking of the police, apparently it took a couple days for anybody to like come check out this whole situation. And if that's true, what do you mean a few days later? Like, again, I don't know the circumstances, but dude, again, did nobody think like, did anybody go check on the vampire in the cave thing and then like check up on the dude that did go over there? Anyways, the station eventually wakes up from nap time and realizes that Luis Martinez is in fact missing, and so they hit up the state capitol and launch an investigation. They head to the neighboring villages of Yerba Buena to try to just get the word, see what's up. Immediately they start gathering similar accounts of these rumors of ancient ceremonies and devil worship going on in town. So the officers are hearing this like, oh shit, so you're saying that dude, he was like being for real? So they finally realized that Sebastian was not bullshitting them and that they should have gone on this a lot sooner. So from this point forward, they kind of hit it in high gear. Finally, they contact the military and get the army to help them out, whatever that means. I feel like a few guns would be enough to dispatch an impoverished village, but what do I know about police protocol? Bring out the damn cannons. First stop, Magdalena and Elazar's farmhouse. The two were found in bed, high as shit, and Santos Hernandez was actually in the pad at the moment, so he books it. While some police officers are apprehending Magdalena and Elazar, some other officers are on pursuit of Santos, and a shootout breaks and Santos is hit. One down, okay? So that's three of them. Where's Cayetano? Get this. He is also found dead. What do you know? A cult member actually took out Cayetano. The cult member in question is a man named Jesus Rubio, and this man is a bold one, all right? So this is what happened. Somehow Jesus finds out that this whole coming into town and fucking shit up thing was all just that. Just like Elazar did, Jesus wants in. And I don't know what's so appealing about this business venture, but I guess we're just in different industries. Cayetano does not give a shit and tells Jesus to fuck off. Thus, Cayetano's ending. After this whole raid, the investigation makes its way into the cave. Searching the property, the bodies of Sebastian Guerrero and Luis Martinez are both found, and Luis Martinez is found with his heart removed from his body. And what do you know? Everything found in the cave backs up Sebastian's story. So, should have just believed him in the first place. And in that search, 6 different dismembered bodies were uncovered. This part I'm not all clear on because I kept hearing that the bodies were found in the caves. But that would mean that these ceremonies were going on for 6 weeks with the victims just like in the room, which would have been stinky. I don't think you could like ignore that. I naturally assumed that these bodies were buried inside of the cave, but the only evidence that I could really find that they were buried at all was this photo that I kept coming across. But it's not in the case. All right, y'all, this was the photo that I kept coming across, and I don't know what it is about this case and misleading photos, but I believe just like the Dagmar over by headshot, that is simply not relevant. Like, it's just not part of the case whatsoever. And so I like reverse image searched the photo because I was getting fed up and I'm like, what even is this shit? And it literally came up with so many other cold cases. Like all of the results were for different Mexican cold cases, and most of them were for the Mark Kilroy, or not most of them, a lot of them were from the Mark Kilroy case, which I'm not very familiar with, but I'm pretty sure is also a cold case. So like, what is it about this photo? It's just what people like to use for like the Mexican cold cases, and I don't know. If I did a couple more, minutes of research, I could probably figure it out, but I just wanted to share that with y'all, that I was like, what the fuck? If you know what case it's actually from, then like comment below and let me know, because I'm so lost in all this shit. I'm like, Magdalena and Elazar are arrested along with some of the cult members as well. The members of the cult were either so traumatized or still so brainwashed that none of them would speak up against Magdalena in court. Loyalty or fear, regardless, Magdalena and Elazar could only be charged for the double homicide of Sebastian Guerrero and Luis Martinez. Elazar and Magdalena Solis were both found guilty and each sentenced 50 years in prison. The remaining Yerba Buena residents that were arrested were put on trial for gang murders and lynching, and all of which were sentenced for 30 years. Magdalena would have been released in 2013, but I could not find any information on where this bitch was. She probably had connections through Elazar. However, it's been speculated that she did die in prison. If you look up this case online, it's described as a vampire cult, and despite the drinking of blood and the human sacrifice, I really do think this is more just a story of taking advantage of a group of very vulnerable people. To me, it's a story of two con men who decided to take complete advantage of a group of people who they knew were extremely disadvantaged in all susceptible areas. That's also probably the reason they chose to manipulate an illiterate village, because they were counting on them not being able to decipher these differences and these inconsistencies with the stories that they presented to them. They were just counting on them not being knowledgeable about the subjects at hand, which unfortunately they were not. Then additionally, they exploited a young sex worker for their scam and enabled her to kill upwards of 15 people in her reign of the only power that she's ever felt. I was reading comments under a YouTube video about Magdalena Solis, and one of the commenters was saying that Magdalena Solis was, and the girls that she was a part of in this brothel, were not sex workers, but were rather sex slaves, just like the girls that were sold into it, and that they were literally created from birth for that. And it was hard enough to find any information at all about Magdalena's background, so I really could not confirm this. I don't think it's very far-fetched to assume that she was born into this, and I mean, it was already said that she was forced into it at 12 years old, so it's not like she ever really had much of a choice. And it seems that Elazar was the only family member in Magdalena's life. So considering the fact that her own brother was her pimp and that he also ended up going along with the three of them, I do not think it's much of a stretch to assume that Elazar did have the utmost control over Magdalena, and that she would be a slave to him in that way. In my mind, that also explains why she went so deep into this power role and how she was able to do the things that she did. If you've never had a say in anything about your life, and your entire worth has always been based on what other people can take from you, and then you're all of a sudden put in front of a bunch of people that are already so brainwashed that they'll literally kill the only few people that they know for you, then I honestly wouldn't even expect anything less of anybody in her position. And again, not defending anything that she did, it's just, it makes sense. I just still like to always try to rationalize these things instead of just pointing at the crazy incestuous vampires and going, what a crazy story. But anyways, that was the story of Magdalena Solis, the high priestess of blood, and her cult of vampires. So if you enjoyed this story, give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Alright, y'all, real quick before I go, I just wanted to show y'all these waterfalls I found. Okay, when I was doing research for this case, because it's in the same San Luis Potosi area of Mexico, and I just looked it up, and it was all these waterfalls, and I'm like, what the fuck? Absolute new addition to my bucket list. I'm a fucking bitch for waterfalls. I love them, and it's so beautiful. I'm going anyways. I also just wanted to let you know that I included all the links to all the sources I used in this video into the description box, as well as the trailer to the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and the song that I used in the transitions for this video was actually a song by an artist named Magdalena Solis. So it was kind of just something I found like when I was searching on YouTube videos for Magdalena Solis, any information, and I just came like that cover art. I was like, that's so cool. Clicked on it. Good song. So that's what I used for that, if you were wondering. So anyways, go check all that out, and thank you so much for watching. Have a marvelous day.